The merciless sun of an alien world beat down on Giles's broad shoulders as he trudged across endless golden dunes. Sweat poured down his weathered face, mixing with the fine sand that seemed to burrow into every pore. His imposing frame, clad in a faded military vest, moved forward purely through iron will. Taking a swig from his nearly empty canteen, he forced himself not to think about the past he'd left far behind, focusing only on survival in this ruthless desert. The landscape stretched infinitely before him, a sea of amber waves that shifted and reformed with each gust of hot wind. His boots sank into the loose sand with every step, making progress exhausting. The pack on his back felt heavier with each passing hour, though he knew its contents had only diminished. Water, some dried rations, a few basic tools, and the worn knife strapped to his thigh. These were all he had left in the universe. Everything else had been stripped away months ago when the courts-martial reached their inevitable conclusion. Giles paused atop a particularly tall dune, shielding his eyes against the brutal glare. The horizon shimmered with heat mirages, playing tricks on his desperate mind. Was that smoke in the distance, or just another illusion? He'd been walking for 3 days since his transport dropped him at the nearest registered settlement, which turned out to be nothing more than a crashed mining vessel and 6 corpses. The frontier colonies were harsh, but this planet made them look like paradise gardens. His throat burned despite the water he'd just consumed. The liquid was warm enough to brew tea and tasted faintly metallic from the recycled filtration system in his canteen. He checked the indicator on the side, less than a quarter remaining. If he didn't find civilization soon, the desert would claim him just as it had claimed countless others who thought they could conquer this world. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distinctive scent of something living, something green. Giles's military training kicked in automatically, his senses sharpening despite his exhaustion. Where there was vegetation, there was water. Where there was water, there were settlements. He adjusted his course slightly, following his nose like a predator tracking prey. As the hours crawled by, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and copper. The temperature, which had been searingly hot, started to drop with alarming speed. Night on this world brought cold that could kill just as surely as the daytime heat. Giles knew he needed shelter, and soon. Then he saw it. Not a mirage this time, but real structures rising from the sand. A settlement sprawled across the base of a rocky outcropping, a haphazard collection of prefab modules and improvised dwellings. Most looked abandoned or poorly maintained, their metal sides pitted and scarred by sandstorms. But on the outskirts, something caught his eye. A single building stood apart from the others, its walls reinforced and clean, a small garden visible even from this distance. Every instinct told him that place was special. Instead of heading to the bustling markets in the settlement's center, where merchants hawked their wares and spacers looked for work, Giles turned his steps toward the solitary house. Something about it called to him, though he couldn't say what. Perhaps it was the order visible even from afar, or maybe just desperation guiding his feet. As he approached, he noticed details that confirmed his initial assessment. The garden was carefully tended, with plants he didn't recognize arranged in precise rows. The building itself showed signs of military efficiency, reinforced corners, minimal windows, a clear field of view in all directions. Someone with training lived here, someone who valued security and discipline. Giles hadn't even raised his hand to knock when the door flew open with sudden violence. The figure that appeared in the doorway made him freeze mid-motion. A blue-skinned alien woman with cascading white hair and violet-gray eyes held him at gunpoint with a weapon he didn't recognize. Her black form-fitting suit accentuated a graceful but powerful build. Every line of her posture screamed warrior. "Enough, human," she said in a melodious but stern voice that somehow worked through his translator implant perfectly. "State your business or leave. You have 10 seconds. Giles slowly raised his empty hands, palms forward in the universal gesture of peace. "Looking for work," he said, his voice rough from disuse and dehydration. "Any work. I can fix things, guard things, haul things. Just need food and supplies enough to get off this rock." The alien woman studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Her eyes tracked across his frame, noting the military vest, the way he stood despite his exhaustion, the knife at his thigh. She was reading him like a tactical assessment, and Giles recognized the process because he'd done it himself 1,000 times. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered the weapon. What she said next hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. "I don't need a worker human. I need a father for my son, someone who can teach him to survive and help him achieve vengeance." Giles blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "You heard me correctly." The woman's expression didn't change. "I can hire any drifter to haul cargo or stand guard. What I need cannot be bought with simple credits. I need someone to raise my son as a warrior, to give him the skills and strength to right a terrible wrong." Before Giles could respond, a small figure emerged from behind the woman. A boy, no more than 8 or 9 by human standards, with the same blue skin and white hair as his mother. But where she radiated controlled danger, the child's eyes held a sadness that no child should know. The boy looked up at Giles with a mixture of curiosity and grief that pierced through the veteran's carefully constructed emotional armor. "Karis," the woman said, her voice transforming instantly into something soft and warm. "Go inside, sweetling. I'll speak with you shortly." The boy nodded obediently and disappeared into the house, but not before giving Giles one more long, evaluating look. When the door closed, the woman's demeanor shifted back to steel. "I am Irison," she said. "My husband was Captain Elior of the Star Guard. He died defending an outpost from Draconid raiders while his own government abandoned him for political expediency. They left him and his men to die rather than risk a diplomatic incident. Now I have a son who asks me every night when his father's coming home, even though he watched the shuttle bearing his father's body land 3 months ago." Giles felt the familiar weight of grief recognition. He knew that particular pain, the betrayal of institutions you'd served, the anger at senseless loss. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I don't understand. Why me?" "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Irison replied. "You move like a soldier. You carry yourself like someone who's seen combat. And you're human, a species renowned for surviving impossible situations through sheer stubborn will. More importantly, you're here, on this forsaken world, which means you're either running from something or towards something. Either way, you understand desperation." She holstered her weapon and stepped aside from the doorway. "Come inside. You look like you're about to collapse, and we can't have a proper conversation with you half dead from dehydration. We'll talk, and then you'll decide whether you want a purpose again or prefer to wander the wastes until they claim you." Giles hesitated only a moment before following her inside. The interior of the home reinforced his earlier assessment. This was the dwelling of a military family. Everything had its place, arranged with precision and purpose. But what dominated the main room was a holographic display on the far wall, showing a blue-skinned male in the formal uniform of a Star Guard captain. He stood tall and proud, his hand resting on a ceremonial blade, his eyes reflecting the same violet gray as Irison's. "My husband," Irison said unnecessarily, her voice carrying a weight of loss. "Karis looks more like him every day. He has his father's eyes, his father's courage. But courage alone won't be enough. He needs training, real training. He needs someone who can teach him to be hard when necessary, to survive when the universe demands it." She moved to a cabinet and pulled out a sealed container, offering it to Giles. He opened it to find it full of cool, clean water. He drank gratefully while she continued speaking. "The Draconids who killed my husband are part of a larger war band that operates in this sector. They raid, they pillage, they kill without mercy or honor. The government does nothing because they've signed treaties with the Draconid homeworld, pretending that these raiders don't exist or are rogues beyond control. It's all lies and political maneuvering while good people die." Giles set down the empty container. "And you want your son to what? Hunt them down? He's a child." "He won't always be a child," Irison said sharply, "and when he's grown, he'll have a choice. But I want him to have the skills to make that choice from a position of strength, not weakness. I want him to know how to fight, how to track, how to survive in hostile territory. I want him to be able to look his father's killers in the eye and not flinch." "That's a heavy burden to place on a kid," Giles observed. "Life is a heavy burden," Irison countered. "I'd rather he carry it with strength than be crushed by it. So I ask you again, human, Giles, isn't it? I saw the name on your vest. Will you help us, or will you walk back out into the desert? Giles looked around the room, at the careful organization, at the hologram of the fallen captain, at the door behind which a grieving child waited. He thought about his own past, his own failures, his own desperate need for redemption. Maybe this was why he'd survived the court-martial, why he'd ended up on this particular world, at this particular house. I'll need to know more, he said carefully. And before you trust me with your son, you should know my history. It's not pretty. I don't expect pretty, Ireson said. I expect honest. Come sit. We have much to discuss. They talked late into the night, under the light of 3 moons visible through the reinforced windows. Giles learned that Irison's people, the Verani, valued honor and family bonds above all else. They were a warrior culture, but not a savage one. They fought when necessary and lived with discipline and purpose. Her husband had been everything a Verani male should be: strong, protective, devoted to his family. In turn, Giles told her about his own past, though it came out in halting sentences weighted with shame. He'd been a captain in Earth's Special Forces, leading a unit that specialized in high-risk extractions and covert operations. The incident on Centauri had been the end of everything. Intelligence suggested a weapons cache in a civilian building. The intel was wrong. The building had been full of refugees, not combatants. 27 people died, including 14 children. Giles had taken full responsibility, refusing to let his superiors scapegoat his subordinates. The court-martial had been swift, the discharge dishonorable. He'd spent months drifting from world to world, trying to outrun the nightmares, trying to find some way to atone for the unforgivable. When he finished speaking, Irison was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. Among my people, a leader who protects their followers, even at cost to themselves, is considered the highest form of honor. You could have blamed your intelligence officers, your commanding officers, or your government. Instead, you accepted responsibility. That speaks to character. Character didn't bring those people back, Giles said bitterly. No, Irison agreed, but it shows you understand the weight of leadership. And that's what Karis will need. Someone who knows that every decision has consequences, who won't teach him that violence is glory. My husband understood this. He taught me that strength without wisdom is just brutality. She stood and moved to a weapons rack on the wall, pulling down 2 practice blades. Before we go further, I need to know you can actually teach my son. Fight me. Giles barely had time to catch the blade she tossed him before she attacked. There was no warning, no formal beginning. She simply moved, her blade whistling through the air toward his throat. Instinct and training took over, his body responding before his mind could protest. They fought in the small space of the living area, their blades clashing with sharp cracks that echoed off the walls. Irison fought like water, flowing around his attacks, her movements economical and precise. Giles countered with raw power and experience, using his greater mass to hold ground while she tried to outmaneuver him. He was stronger, but she was faster. He had reach, but she had technique refined over years of dedicated practice. They circled each other, testing, probing, looking for weaknesses. Giles managed to catch her blade and turn her strike, forcing her to disengage and reset. She responded by feinting high and striking low, nearly sweeping his legs out from under him. The fight lasted only minutes but felt like hours. Both were breathing hard when they finally separated, blades lowered. Irison's eyes sparkled with something that might have been approval. You'll do, she said simply. You're out of practice, but the foundation is solid. More importantly, you didn't hesitate when I attacked, but you also didn't try to actually hurt me. You fought to test, not to kill. That's what Karis needs, someone who knows the difference. Giles lowered the practice blade, his muscles already starting to ache. He'd been soft from months of wandering. When do we start? Tomorrow at dawn, Irison said, but tonight you'll stay in the guest quarters and recover your strength. We eat a simple meal in an hour. You'll meet Karis properly then. The next morning arrived too quickly for Giles' exhausted body, but he forced himself out of the surprisingly comfortable bed when he heard movement in the main house. He found Irisan already awake, preparing a breakfast of local grains and some kind of protein that didn't look entirely unlike scrambled eggs. Karis appeared moments later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw Giles, he stopped, suddenly shy. The boy was small for his age, his frame delicate compared to his mother's warrior build. But Giles noticed the way he moved, already showing signs of training, his balance natural and centered. "Good morning," Giles said carefully. "Your mother tells me you're interested in learning earth-fighting techniques." Karis nodded, his violet-gray eyes wide. "Father used to tell me stories about human warriors. He said they were strong because they never gave up, even when they should. He said a human in a corner was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy." "Your father was a smart man," Giles replied, "but strength isn't just about not giving up. It's about knowing when to fight and when to think. Want to learn the difference?" The boy's whole face lit up. "Yes, Mother says you were a captain, like Father. Did you command many warriors?" "A few," Giles said, his chest tightening at the memory. "And I made mistakes that I'm still learning from. But I can teach you what I learned, if you're willing to work hard." "I'll work harder than anyone," Karis declared with childish enthusiasm that made both adults smile despite themselves. Training began in the backyard, a space that Ireson had clearly prepared for exactly this purpose. There were practice dummies, a small obstacle course, and an area marked off for sparring. Giles started with the basics: stance, balance, how to move your center of gravity without telegraphing your intentions. Karis absorbed everything like a sponge, his young mind cataloging every detail. He asked endless questions. Why do you put your weight on this foot instead of that one? How do you know which way to dodge? What do you do if someone bigger attacks you? Giles answered each question patiently, finding himself drawn into the teaching role more naturally than he'd expected. Between exercises, Karis would ask about Earth, about the animals there, the food, the stories. Giles found himself sharing memories he'd thought locked away. Childhood tales of camping trips with his own father. Stories of Earth's diverse ecosystems. The taste of real food grown in actual soil instead of synthesized in vats. As the days became weeks, something fundamental shifted in Giles. The ice that had encased his heart since Centauri began to thaw. He woke each morning with purpose, knowing that a small blue-skinned boy would be waiting eagerly for lessons. He went to sleep each night feeling, for the first time in months, that his existence mattered to someone. The evenings brought a different kind of fulfillment. After Karis went to bed, Giles and Ireson would sit on the small porch under the light of the 3 moons, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about Vayrani culture, about the complex social structures and honor codes that governed her people. He shared more about Earth, about humanity's chaotic expansion into the stars, about the wars and peace that followed. The tension between them grew with each passing night, shifting from tactical respect to something deeper and more primal. Giles found himself noticing details he tried to ignore. The way moonlight caught in her white hair, the graceful strength of her movements, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes when she smiled. One night, as they sat in comfortable silence watching the desert stars, Ireson reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cool to the touch, but her grip was firm and sure. "Among my people," she said quietly, "physical intimacy is considered a sharing of essence, not just bodies. When we choose a partner, we're choosing to merge our very beings, at least for that time. It's why we don't take such things lightly." Giles's heart hammered in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand what it means if I ask you to share my bed," Ireson said, turning to face him fully. "I'm not offering just physical comfort. I'm offering a bond, a connection. My people can sense emotions during such moments. We literally feel what our partner feels. It's intimate in ways humans might not understand." "And you're sure you want that with me?" Giles asked, his voice rough with emotion. "With someone who failed so catastrophically? Someone who's broken?" "We're all broken," Ireson said softly. "My husband is dead, killed by cowards while his government looked away. You lost your honor in a war that demanded impossible choices. But broken things can be mended, Giles. And sometimes the mended places are stronger than they were before." She stood, offering him her hand. Come with me. Not because you think you owe me, or because you're grateful for shelter. Come because you feel what I feel. This connection between us. This recognition of kindred spirits. Giles took her hand and stood. They walked to her room in silence, the weight of the moment making words unnecessary. Inside, the space was illuminated by moonlight filtering through tinted windows, casting everything in shades of blue and silver. What followed was unlike anything Giles had experienced. Irison hadn't exaggerated about her people's abilities. As their bodies came together, he felt her emotions flowing into him. Her desire, yes, but also her grief, her determination, her slowly growing hope. And she felt his in return, all his guilt and shame and desperate need for redemption laid bare. There was no hiding, no pretending. They saw each other completely, flaws and strengths intermingled. And somehow, in that perfect vulnerability, they found not judgment, but acceptance. They made love with an intensity that left them both trembling, their bodies and souls intertwined in ways that transcended species or culture. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the cooling night air, Irison traced patterns on his chest with one blue finger. You feel it now, yes? The bond? Like nothing I've ever known, Giles admitted. It's terrifying and beautiful at once. That's how it should be, she murmured. Now sleep. Tomorrow brings new challenges, but tonight we rest. The peace they'd found shattered 3 days later with the arrival of an unwelcome visitor. Giles was in the yard with Karis, teaching the boy how to use a staff for both offense and defense, when a ground vehicle pulled up to the house. A male Vayrani emerged, his blue skin adorned with the elaborate markings of high social rank. Jonas, as Irison coldly introduced him, was the local minister of trade, a position that granted him both wealth and influence. He ignored Giles entirely at first, focusing all his attention on Irison with an proprietary air that made Giles's hackles rise. Still hiding out here in the wastes, I see, Jonas said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Irison, this is beneath you. Your husband's death was a tragedy, but life continues. You should be in the capital, using your skills for something meaningful, not wasting away in this backwater. I choose to be here, Irison said icily. And I don't recall inviting you to visit, Jonas. A concerned friend doesn't need an invitation, Jonas replied smoothly. Then his eyes slid to Giles with obvious disdain. Though I see you've acquired a new pet. A human? Really, Irison, I thought you had more dignity than to take up with a lesser species. Giles felt Karis tense beside him, the boy's hand gripping his staff with white-knuckled intensity. He put a calming hand on the boy's shoulder, keeping his own expression neutral despite the insult. This human, Irison said in a voice that could cut steel, has shown more honor in a few weeks than you've displayed in years, Jonas. He's training my son and helping our household. What he is to me beyond that is none of your concern. Jonas's expression darkened. Isn't it? I had hoped, given enough time, that you might see reason, that we might, he gestured vaguely. But I see you'd rather consort with aliens than accept a proper match within your own species. My husband has been dead less than a season, Irison hissed. And even if he'd been gone a decade, I would never choose you. Your interest in me has nothing to do with affection and everything to do with acquiring my family's trade connections and my husband's military legacy. Now leave before I show you exactly what I learned during my own time in the Guard. Jonas didn't leave immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back to Giles, his eyes calculating. You look familiar, human. Have we met? No, that's not it. But I've seen your face somewhere. He pulled out a data pad, his fingers moving across it with practiced ease. Military record, perhaps? Yes, there it is. Captain Giles. Oh my. His smile widened with malicious glee. The Butcher of Centauri. How delightful. Irison, do you know what kind of creature you've welcomed into your home? This man is responsible for the deaths of 27 innocent civilians, including children. He was dishonorably discharged for incompetence and gross negligence. Karis looked up at Giles with confusion and hurt in his eyes. Irison's expression had gone carefully blank, her training kicking in to hide her emotions. Giles felt his stomach drop, all the peace he'd found over the past weeks crumbling into dust. The records are public, Jonas continued, enjoying the moment. The Earth courts-martial are very thorough in their documentation. Perhaps young Karis should know that the man teaching him to fight is also a child killer. Rather ironic, don't you think? Get out, Iverson said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of violence barely restrained. Now, Jonas, before I forget, we're supposed to be civilized. Jonas made a show of leaving gracefully, but his parting words cut deep. I'll return when you've come to your senses, my dear. I'm a patient man. When he was gone, silence filled the yard like poison gas. Karis stood frozen, the staff hanging limply in his hands. Irison's face remained unreadable, her eyes fixed on some distant point. It's true, Giles said, his voice rough. Every word. I should have told you myself, but I was a coward. I let myself believe I could outrun it. That it wouldn't matter here, so far from Earth. I'm sorry. He turned to go, to pack his few belongings and return to the desert where he belonged. But Irison's voice stopped him. Karis, go inside, please. But Mother, inside, now. The boy fled, tears streaming down his blue cheeks. When they were alone, Irison finally looked at Giles, and he braced himself for the condemnation he deserved. Tell me what happened, she said. Not the official record. Tell me the truth. So he did. He told her about the intelligence reports that seemed solid, about the command decisions made under pressure, about the moment they'd breached the building and found families instead of weapons. He told her about the screaming, the blood, the smell of burning flesh that still haunted his dreams. He told her about taking full responsibility, about refusing to let his people be sacrificed for his mistakes. I don't expect forgiveness, he finished. From you, from Karis, from anyone. What I did was unforgivable. Those children are dead because of my orders, my failure to question bad intelligence, my eagerness to complete the mission. Jonas was right. I'm a butcher. I should never have let myself get close to Karis, never have pretended I could be anything other than what I am. Irison was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face. Then she said something that shocked him to his core. My people have a saying, the warrior who carries their failures honestly is worth 10 who claim perfection. You took responsibility. You protected your subordinates. You accepted the consequences of your actions rather than hiding behind orders or blaming others. That speaks to honor, Giles, even in the midst of tragedy. I killed children, he said hoarsely. Yes, she agreed, and you will carry that weight for the rest of your life. But does that weight make you worthless? Does it mean you can never do good again? Never protect anyone? Never teach or love or serve a purpose? Or does it mean you understand, more than most, the true cost of violence and the responsibility that comes with power? She stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. I felt your emotions, remember? When we bonded. I felt your guilt, your shame, your desperate need to atone. But I also felt your genuine care for Karis, your commitment to teaching him right, your protective instinct toward us. That's not the heart of a monster, Giles. That's the heart of someone trying very hard to be better than they were. What about Karis? Giles asked. He looked at you like a child whose world just got more complicated, Irison interrupted. Give him time. Talk to him honestly as you talk to me. Let him decide for himself. He's smarter than you think. That night, Giles knocked softly on Karis's door. The boy was sitting on his bed, his eyes red from crying, but his expression determined. I want to know the truth, Karis said before Giles could speak. Not what Jonas said, not the official story. I want to know what really happened. So Giles told him, in simple words appropriate for a child, but without hiding the essential truth. He explained about wars, about bad information, about making decisions with incomplete knowledge. He talked about the children who died, about how their faces haunted him, about how he'd accepted punishment because someone had to be accountable. When he finished, Karis was quiet for a moment. Then the boy said something that broke Giles' heart and mended it at the same time. My father told me once that good people can do bad things, especially in war. He said the difference between good people and bad people isn't that good people never make mistakes. It's that good people feel bad about their mistakes and try to be better. Do you feel bad about what happened? Every day, Giles whispered. Every single day. And are you trying to be better? I'm trying, Karis nodded slowly. Then I think Father would say you're a good person who did a bad thing. And Mother says good people deserve chances to be better. So I'm going to keep training with you if you want to keep teaching me. Are you sure? Giles asked. Jonas said you were a child killer, Karis said with a child's blunt honesty. But child killers don't teach other children how to protect themselves. They don't get sad about the children they hurt. They don't try to be better. So I think Jonas was wrong about you. Giles pulled the boy into a tight hug, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Thank you, he managed to say. I'll do everything I can to be worthy of that trust. The weeks that followed brought a new depth to their relationship. Giles no longer hid his past, and both Irison and Karis seemed to respect him more for his honesty about his failures. The training continued, but now with added urgency. Irison had received reports of increased draconid activity in the sector, and she wanted Karis prepared for any eventuality. Giles threw himself into the teaching with renewed purpose. He taught Karis not just fighting techniques, but survival skills. How to find water in the desert, how to build shelter from minimal materials, how to track prey and avoid predators. He taught him about strategic thinking, about assessing threats, about knowing when to fight and when to flee. More importantly, he taught him about responsibility. Every lesson included a discussion about the consequences of violence, about the weight of taking a life, about protecting those weaker than yourself. These weren't abstract concepts. Giles drew on his own bitter experiences to illustrate each point. Irisan watched these lessons with approval, occasionally adding her own perspective from Virani culture. She and Giles grew closer with each passing day, their bond strengthening through shared purpose and mutual respect. At night, they would come together with an intensity that never faded, their connection deepening as they learned to navigate each other's emotional landscapes. Then came the day that changed everything. The settlement's alarm system, such as it was, consisted of a series of sirens positioned at key points around the perimeter. When they all started wailing at once, Giles knew immediately that this was no drill. He ran outside to find people streaming toward the center of the settlement, panic in their eyes. Irison was already there, her combat gear on, her weapon ready. A holographic display showed a draconid scout ship entering the system, followed by what looked like a full raiding party. They've never come this far into the interior before, someone said, their voice shaking. Why now? Because our defense contracts expired last month, another voice answered bitterly. The government decided we weren't worth protecting anymore. We're on our own. Giles's military training kicked in immediately. He assessed the situation with cold professionalism. The settlement had maybe 24 people capable of fighting, limited weapons, and no real fortifications. Against a draconid raiding party, they would be slaughtered, unless they fought smart. Listen to me, he said, his command voice cutting through the chaos. We can't win a straight fight, but we can make them regret coming here. We need to set up defensive positions at the 3 main approaches. We need to evacuate non-combatants to the old mining tunnels on the eastern ridge, and we need to do it now before they land. Who put the human in charge? Someone demanded. I did, Irison said firmly. He's military trained, which is more than any of us can say. If you want to live through this, you'll follow his orders. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Giles organized the defenders into 3 groups, positioning them at choke points where the attackers would be funneled into kill zones. He showed them how to create improvised barricades, how to set up overlapping fields of fire with their limited weapons, how to retreat and regroup rather than making suicidal stands. Karis he sent with the other children to the evacuation point, despite the boys' protests. Your job is to lead them safely to the tunnels, Giles told him firmly. That's not a punishment, it's a responsibility. Those children need someone brave and smart to guide them. Can you do that? Karis's chest puffed out with pride at being given such an important task. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Now go, and don't look back no matter what you hear. The Draconids landed just after nightfall, their ships touching down in a storm of dust and engine wash. They emerged in disciplined ranks. These weren't random raiders, but trained soldiers. Their scales glinted bronze and green in the light of the 3 moons, Their weapons clearly advanced technology that outclassed anything the settlers had. Giles watched from his position behind a makeshift barricade. Ireson crouched beside him. "How many?" she whispered. 40, maybe 50, he estimated. "Professional soldiers, not thugs. This is a military operation." "They're after supplies," Ireson said. "Food, water, fuel. They'll take everything and kill anyone who resists." "Then we make resistance too costly," Giles replied. "Remember, we don't have to win. We just have to make them decide we're not worth the effort." The Draconids advanced in a standard search and secure pattern, clearly expecting minimal opposition. They got their first surprise when they reached the outer perimeter, where Giles had set up a series of tripwires connected to improvised alarms. The noise was deafening, and in the confusion, the first group of defenders opened fire. 3 Draconids went down before they could take cover. The rest responded with overwhelming firepower, but by then the defenders had already retreated to their secondary positions. The Draconids advanced again, more cautiously this time, only to run into the second defensive line. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Draconids had superior weapons and training, but Giles had terrain and motivation on his side. Every time the attackers thought they'd pin down the defenders, they found themselves hitting empty positions while getting shot at from unexpected angles. But it couldn't last. The Draconids were too numerous, too well equipped. Slowly but surely, they pushed the defenders back toward the settlement center. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the defenders were running out of ammunition and space to retreat. Then disaster struck. A group of Draconids broke through the eastern defensive line, the same direction where the children had fled to the tunnels. Giles saw them change course, heading toward the vulnerable evacuation route. He didn't think, just acted. Leaving his position, he ran toward the breakthrough, shouting to draw their attention. The Draconids turned, their weapons tracking him, but he was already moving, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. He led them on a chase away from the tunnels, deeper into the rocky outcroppings where their superior firepower would be less effective. 3 Draconids followed him into the rocks. Giles dropped his rifle, out of ammunition anyway, and drew his knife. This would be close quarters work, brutal and bloody. The first Draconid around the corner took Giles's knife to the throat before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to get off a shot that grazed Giles' shoulder before Giles broke his neck with his bare hands. The third was smarter, keeping his distance, using his weapon's range advantage. Giles felt the energy bolt hit his shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, his arm burning with pain. The Draconid advanced, weapon raised for the kill shot. Then Karis was there, appearing from nowhere with a rock in his hands. He smashed it into the Draconid's knee with all his small strength. It wasn't enough to seriously injure the warrior, but it distracted him for a crucial second. A second was all Giles needed to lunge forward, his knife finding the gap in the Draconid's armor. "I told you to stay with the children," Giles gasped as the Draconid fell. "I did," Karis said, his voice shaking, but his eyes fierce. "I got them all safely to the tunnels. Then I came back because you needed help. Did I do wrong?" Giles pulled the boy into a one-armed hug, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. "You did perfectly. Now we need to get back to your mother." They emerged from the rocks to find the battle turning. The Draconids had the defenders surrounded, victory within their grasp. Then the sky lit up with engine fire as ships descended through the atmosphere. Human ships, bearing the insignia of the Earth Coalition fleet. The human warships opened fire with devastating precision, destroying the Draconid landing craft in moments. Dropships descended, disgorging Coalition Marines in full combat gear. The Draconids, caught between 2 forces and with their escape route destroyed, fought with desperate ferocity, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Within minutes, the battle was over. The surviving Draconids were in custody, the defenders were being treated by Coalition medics, and Giles found himself face-to-face with a Coalition commander, wearing the insignia of a fleet admiral. "Captain Giles," the admiral said, extending her hand. "Or should I say Captain Giles again? The Centauri case has been reviewed and new evidence has come to light. The intelligence report you acted on was deliberately falsified by a mole working for the Draconid Coalition. You were set up to take the fall for an enemy operation. Your discharge has been reversed, your rank restored, and the coalition would very much like you to return to active duty." Giles stared at her, his mind reeling. Vindication after months of disgrace, his honor restored, his career waiting to be reclaimed. Everything he'd thought lost forever, offered back to him on a silver platter. Then he looked at Irasan, standing nearby with Karis tucked against her side. Both were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. The boy had blood on his hands from helping Giles, and Irasan's suit was scorched from fighting. His family, his purpose, his redemption, not in the eyes of the military, but in his own heart. "I'm honored by the offer, Admiral," Giles said slowly, "and grateful that the truth has come out, but I have to decline. My place is here now, with people who need me, with people I need." The Admiral looked surprised, then understanding. "The offer remains open if you change your mind. In the meantime, I'll see that this settlement receives proper defense contracts and equipment. Consider it a thank you for taking down that raiding party. You saved us weeks of hunting them down." When the coalition forces departed hours later, Giles stood with Irasan and Karis watching the ships disappear into the dawn sky. The settlement was damaged but intact, the people alive if shaken, and Giles had made a choice that felt right in a way nothing had in years. "You gave up everything," Irasan said quietly. "No," Giles corrected, taking her hand. "I gave up things I thought I wanted. I kept everything that actually matters." Karis looked up at him with shining eyes. "Does this mean you're staying? Really staying?" "Really staying," Giles confirmed. "If you'll still have me." The boy launched himself at Giles, wrapping his arms around the human's waist. Irasan joined the embrace, and for the first time since Centauri, Giles felt at peace with himself and his place in the universe. In the days that followed, life returned to a new normal. The settlement rebuilt, now with proper defenses and a coalition garrison providing security. Giles became the unofficial liaison between the human military and the local population, a role that suited his skills and his need to help. But more importantly, he continued teaching Karis. The boy had proven himself in battle, showing courage and quick thinking that any soldier would be proud of. But Giles was careful to emphasize that fighting was always a last resort, that real strength came from protecting others, not seeking violence. Irasan watched her son grow under Giles's guidance, seeing him develop not just physical skills, but emotional wisdom. The grief that had shadowed Karis's eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence and joy in learning. He still missed his father. He always would, but he'd found a new father figure who honored that memory rather than trying to replace it. As for Giles and Irasan, their bond deepened with each passing day. They were partners in every sense, training together, planning together, building a life together. The physical connection they shared remained intense, but it was matched now by emotional intimacy and mutual respect. One night, several weeks after the battle, they sat on their usual spot on the porch under the three moons. Karis was asleep inside, exhausted from a day of training. Irasan leaned against Giles's shoulder, her white hair catching the moonlight. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for staying, for choosing us over your career." "You gave me something worth staying for," Giles replied. "A home, a family, a purpose that actually means something. That's worth more than any rank or medal." "My husband would have liked you," Irasan said softly. "He valued honor and sacrifice above all else. What you did, taking responsibility for Centauri, protecting your people, he would have called you a true warrior." "I hope I can live up to that," Giles said. "I hope I can be the father Karis deserves, the partner you deserve." "You already are," Irasan assured him. She turned to face him fully, her violet gray eyes serious. "Among my people, there's a ceremony for when two souls choose to bond permanently. It's not marriage as humans understand it. It's deeper, a melding of life paths. I would like to perform that ceremony with you, if you're willing." Giles felt his heart swell with emotion. "I've never been more willing to do anything in my life." They performed the ceremony a month later, with the whole settlement in attendance. It was a simple affair by Vayrani standards, but beautiful in its sincerity. Giles spoke vows in Irasan's language, promising to honor her, protect her family, and walk beside her for as long as they both lived. Irasan spoke her own vows, declaring him worthy to stand as father to her son and partner to her soul. Karis stood beside them, his face solemn with the importance of the moment. When the ceremony concluded, he took both their hands and declared in a clear voice that he accepted Giles as his father, not in replacement of the father he'd lost, but as an addition to his family. The celebration lasted late into the night, with food and music and dancing under the stars. For the first time since arriving on this harsh world, Giles allowed himself to feel truly happy. He'd come here broken and lost, expecting nothing but sand and solitude. Instead, he'd found love, purpose, and a family that accepted him despite his flaws. As the moons climbed higher and the celebration wound down, Giles stood with his new wife and son, looking out at the desert that had nearly killed him months ago. That same desert now represented home, the place where he'd found redemption not through violence or duty, but through love and commitment. Jonas never returned to trouble them. Whether he'd been warned off by the coalition presence or simply decided Ireson wasn't worth the effort, Giles didn't know or care. What mattered was that they were safe, together, in building something real. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. The frontier was never truly peaceful, and there were moments when Giles had to use his combat skills to protect the settlement. But he never fought alone. Ireson stood beside him, a warrior in her own right, and as Karis grew older, he too joined the defense forces. Giles taught his son everything he knew about tactics, survival, and warfare. But more importantly, he taught him about honor, responsibility, and the weight of command. Karis grew into a young man who combined his father's military discipline with his mother's Vairani values, becoming someone both cultures could be proud of. On Karis's 16th birthday, by human reckoning, they made a pilgrimage to the memorial that had been erected for his biological father and the other soldiers who died in the Draconid raid. Karis stood before the monument in silence, then turned to Giles with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for teaching me to be strong enough to honor him." "You honor him every day," Giles replied, "by being the man he would have wanted you to become." They stood together in silence, 3 generations of warriors connected by bonds stronger than blood. Giles thought about the path that had led him here, through failure and disgrace, through desert and battle, through grief and love. If someone had told him when he was stumbling through those dunes half dead from thirst that he would end up here, he would never have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Sometimes losing everything was necessary to find what you really needed. Sometimes the person you became when you hit rock bottom was stronger and better than the person you'd been at your peak. Giles had asked an alien widow for work, expecting to be hired as a laborer or guard. Instead, she demanded something far more important and far more challenging. She demanded he become a father, a role he'd never imagined for himself. In rising to that challenge, he'd found not just a job, but a calling, not just shelter, but a home, not just survival, but a reason to live. As they walked back from the memorial, Karis ran ahead to check on something in the distance. Ireson took Giles's hand, her grip warm and familiar. "Any regrets?" she asked. Giles looked at the settlement spread before them, at the house they'd built together, at the son they were raising. He thought about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. He thought about Centauri and all the weight he still carried, but also about the good he'd done since then, the lives he'd protected, the family he'd built. "Not a single one," he said honestly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." And under the light of 3 alien moons, in a settlement on the edge of civilization, surrounded by blue-skinned people who'd become his family, Giles finally understood what it meant to be home. Not the place you were born, but the place you chose. Not the life you planned, but the life you built from the ashes of your failures. Not redemption granted from above, but redemption earned through love and dedication and the simple act of showing up every day for the people who needed you. He'd come to this world asking for work. Instead, he'd been given something infinitely more valuable, a second chance at being the man he'd always wanted to be. And that was worth more than any rank, any honor, any achievement his old life could have offered. Karis called out from ahead, having spotted something interesting in the rocks. Giles and Ireson hurried to catch up, their hands still linked, their hearts still bound. Behind them, The desert stretched endlessly, beautiful and terrible and home. What Karis had found turned out to be tracks, fresh ones made by something heavy dragging through the sand. Giles knelt beside them, his trained eye reading the story written in disturbed earth. Whatever had made these marks was large, possibly injured, and heading directly toward the settlement. "We need to get back," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Karis but knowing Irisan would understand the urgency in his tone. She nodded, her hand moving instinctively to the blade at her hip. They reached the settlement just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the prefab buildings. The tracks led straight to the medical center, where a small crowd had gathered. Giles pushed through to find the settlement's doctor, a gruff Virani named Torek, standing over a makeshift stretcher. On it lay a human woman, her combat gear torn and bloody, her breathing shallow. Her dark hair was matted with sand and dried blood, and ugly claw marks raked across her armor. But what caught Giles' attention was the insignia on her shoulder. Earth Coalition Special Operations. "Found her half dead in the west," Torek muttered. "She's been mauled by something big. Sand prowler maybe, or worse. Lost a lot of blood. Don't know if she'll make it." Giles moved closer, studying the woman's face. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place it. Her eyes flickered open briefly, unfocused with pain and blood loss, before closing again. "Do what you can for her," Giles told Torek. "I'll try to find out what she was running from." He spent the next hour tracking back along the woman's trail, Karis insisting on coming despite Irisan's protests. The boy had grown considerably in the past years, tall and strong for his age, and his tracking skills were now almost as good as Giles's own. They found the attack site 2 kilometers out, a depression in the rocks where the sand was churned up and stained dark. The creature's tracks were clear now, showing something with 6 legs and claws the size of daggers. A sandstalker, one of the deadliest predators on the planet. "She fought it off," Karis observed, pointing to scorch marks on the rocks. "Energy weapon, but it ran out of charge. See how the last few marks are just scratches?" She switched to a blade. "Good eyes," Giles approved. "But look here, she wasn't alone. 2 more sets of tracks, human-sized, heading north. Her companions abandoned her. They followed the northern tracks until darkness made it too dangerous to continue. When they returned to the settlement, the woman was awake, though barely. Irisan sat beside her bed, offering water in careful sips. "Her name is Irene," Irisan said quietly when Giles entered. "She's been asking for someone named Gilbert. Says it's urgent." Irene's eyes locked onto Giles with desperate intensity. "You're military," she rasped. "I can tell. Coalition?" "Was," Giles confirmed. "Now I just protect this settlement. What happened out there?" "Ambush," Irene managed between painful breaths. "Our team, we were tracking Draconid supply routes. Intel said they were moving weapons through the deep desert. We got jumped by stalkers. Someone drove them toward our position deliberately. My team scattered. I tried to make it back to our pickup point, but..." She coughed, her face twisting in pain. Torek moved in with medication, but she waved him off. "Need to warn you. Gilbert and Harvey, my team members, they went to the northern canyon. There's a Draconid cache there. Weapons and supplies. But it's a trap. The whole thing is a trap." "For who?" Giles asked. "For anyone stupid enough to investigate," Irene said, "including coalition forces. The Draconids want to draw out our units, ambush them in the canyon. But that's not all. They're using this settlement as bait. They know there's a coalition liaison here now. They know about you." Giles felt ice form in his gut. "They're coming here?" "Already here," Irene whispered. "Scouts, maybe more. That stalker attack wasn't random. They herded those beasts toward us, then pulled back to watch what would happen. They're studying you, learning your defenses, and when they attack..." She passed out before finishing, her body finally succumbing to blood loss and trauma. Torek immediately began emergency treatment while Giles stepped outside to think. Irisan joined him moments later. "You believe her?" "I believe someone wanted her dead before she could warn us," Giles said. "And I believe we need to find her teammates. If they stumble into that trap, they're dead. But more importantly, we need to figure out where these Draconid scouts are hiding." The next morning, Irison organized the settlement's defenses while Giles prepared to search for the missing coalition operatives. Karras appeared at dawn, fully equipped with a pack, water, and weapons. "You're not going alone," the young man said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Giles started to refuse, but Irison's hand on his arm stopped him. "He's ready," she said quietly. "He's been ready for a while now. You've trained him well. Trust that training." So they set out together, father and son, tracking across the brutal landscape toward the northern canyons. The terrain grew increasingly hostile as they traveled, the sand giving way to jagged rock formations that could hide 1,000 threats. They found the first body at midday, a male human, his throat torn out by claws. His coalition gear was stripped, his weapons gone. Nearby, drag marks showed where something had pulled him from his hiding spot. "Harvey," Karras said quietly, reading the name stenciled on the man's armor. "Irene's teammate." "One left," Giles said grimly. "Gilbert, and he's either dead or in serious trouble." They found Gilbert alive, but only barely. He was pinned down in a shallow cave, surrounded by 3 Draconid scouts who were clearly toying with him, making him waste ammunition before moving in for the kill. The man was down to his last few shots, his leg badly injured. Giles signaled Karras to circle around while he created a distraction. Years of training paid off as they executed the maneuver flawlessly. Giles's arrow took the first Draconid through the throat before the others even knew they were under attack. Karras dropped from above, his blade finding the gap in the second Draconid's armor with lethal precision. The third Draconid was faster, more experienced. He rolled away from Giles's follow-up attack and brought his own weapon to bear. The energy bolt caught Giles in the side, spinning him around. The Draconid advanced for the kill, but Gilbert's last shot caught him in the knee, staggering him just long enough for Karras to finish what his father had started. When the dust settled, all 3 Draconids were dead. Giles was wounded but mobile, and Gilbert stared at them with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "You came," Gilbert said simply. "Irene told us there was a human at the settlement, but I didn't think. We left her. We abandoned her and ran. I'm not proud of it." "You're alive," Giles said, grimacing as Karras helped bind his wound. "Right now, that's what matters. We need to get you back to the settlement and figure out what the Draconids are really planning." The journey back took twice as long with Gilbert's injured leg and Giles's own wound, but they made it before nightfall. Irene was conscious again, and the reunion between the 2 coalition operatives was emotional if brief. "The cache," Gilbert insisted once they'd compared notes. "It's real, but it's not just bait. Irene was right about the trap, but wrong about the scale. We intercepted Draconid communications. They're planning a major offensive. They want to wipe out every settlement in this sector, starting with this one. The cache is just a lure to draw away coalition reinforcements before the main assault." Giles felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders again. "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe less," Gilbert said. "They're waiting for something, some kind of signal or reinforcement. But when they come, they'll come hard and fast." That night, Giles called together the settlement's council. Along with Irison, there was Torek the doctor, a merchant named Ferris who spoke for the traders, and several other influential residents. He laid out the situation plainly. A Draconid assault force was gathering, and the settlement was their primary target. "We can't evacuate everyone in time," Ferris said. "The children, the elderly. Where would they even go? The next settlement is weeks away across the deep desert." "Then we stand and fight," Irison said firmly. "We've beaten them before. We can do it again." "Before, we had surprise and a small raiding party," Giles countered. "This time, they'll be prepared. They'll have numbers, heavy weapons, and a battle plan. We need help." Gilbert spoke up. "I can send a distress call to Coalition Command, but the nearest fleet response is 10 days out, minimum. Even with emergency protocols, you're looking at a week before reinforcements arrive." "Then we buy a week," Giles said. "We fortify, we prepare, and we make them pay for every meter of ground they take." Over the next 3 days, the settlement transformed into a fortress. Giles used every trick he'd learned in 2 decades of military service. They dug defensive positions, created kill zones, set up overlapping fields of fire. They stockpiled weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies. Every able-bodied adult learned to shoot, to fight, to follow orders under fire. Karras worked alongside Giles the entire time, showing leadership skills that made his father proud. The young man organized the younger residents into emergency response teams, taught them basic first aid and evacuation procedures, and never once complained about the brutal pace of work. On the fourth day, the Draconids came. They didn't announce themselves with sirens or warnings this time. The first indication of the attack was when the eastern watchtower simply exploded. The guards' bodies scattered across the sand. Then the sky filled with descending craft, not the handful from before, but dozens of them, disgorging troops in disciplined waves. Giles triggered the alarm and rushed to his command post, Irison already at his side coordinating the defenders. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see the Draconid force spreading out in the textbook assault formation. This wasn't a raid. It was a proper military operation, and they were outnumbered at least 4-1. "First wave!" someone shouted, and then the shooting started. The initial assault hit the northern barricades with devastating force. The defenders held, but barely, trading ground grudgingly and bleeding the attackers for every position. Giles moved between defensive points, directing fire, shoring up weak spots, dragging wounded fighters back to cover. Karras commanded the eastern defenses, his calm voice cutting through the chaos as he coordinated his team. Giles saw him take down 3 Draconids in quick succession, his movements economical and deadly. The boy had become a warrior, and in that moment, Giles felt both pride and crushing fear for his safety. The battle raged through the day and into the night, the settlement's lights creating a nightmare landscape of shadows and muzzle flashes. The Draconids pushed hard, taking casualties but never breaking momentum. They had numbers and equipment on their side, and they knew it. By dawn of the second day, the settlement had lost 1/3 of its perimeter. Bodies lay in heaps at the barricades, both defender and attacker. Ammunition was running low. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted, and still the Draconids came. Giles gathered his remaining commanders for a brief meeting. Irison's armor was scorched and dented. Gilbert nursed a shoulder wound. Irene, still recovering from her earlier injuries, had insisted on fighting and now looked ready to collapse. Karras stood among them, blood on his blade, exhaustion in his eyes, but his spine still straight. "We can't hold them another day," Giles said bluntly. "We've hurt them badly, but they're still too strong. We need to change tactics." "What do you have in mind?" Irison asked. "We make them think we're beaten," Giles said. "We pull back to the inner compound, make it look like we're collapsing. When they rush in for the final push, we hit them from prepared positions. It's a desperation move, but it might buy us the time we need for coalition reinforcements to arrive." It was a brutal gamble, and everyone knew it, but they also knew they had no other choice. The order went out, and the defenders began a fighting retreat toward the settlement's center, leaving the outer positions to the advancing Draconids. The enemy took the bait, pressing their advantage with increased aggression. They poured into the settlement's outer ring, celebrating their apparent victory. Then Giles sprang the trap. Hidden defenders emerged from concealed positions, catching the Draconids in a crossfire. Improvised explosives detonated in their midst, sowing chaos and confusion. What had looked like a rout became a slaughter as the overextended Draconid forces found themselves cut off and surrounded. But the enemy commander wasn't foolish. He pulled his forces back, regrouping outside the settlement's range. The lull that followed was almost worse than the fighting. Everyone knew it was just the calm before the final storm. That night, Giles sat with Irison and Karras in a brief moment of peace. All 3 were wounded, exhausted, running on pure willpower. Around them, the settlement burned in a dozen places, the air thick with smoke and the smell of death. "I'm sorry," Giles said quietly. "I brought this on you. If I hadn't stayed, if the coalition hadn't marked this settlement as having strategic value—" "Don't!" Irison interrupted firmly. "You gave us the ability to fight back. Without your training, your leadership, we would have been wiped out in the first assault. You gave us a chance, Giles. That's all anyone can ask." Karras nodded agreement. "Father taught me that standing for something is worth dying for. I'd rather die fighting beside my family than live knowing I ran when they needed me." Before Giles could respond, a sound cut through the night, the distinctive roar of atmospheric engines. But these weren't Draconid ships. Giles recognized that sound from his military days. Coalition heavy cruisers, making an emergency combat descent. The cavalry had arrived early. What followed was less a battle than an execution. The coalition warships opened fire with devastating precision, their sensors having mapped the enemy positions during their descent. Draconid forces that had been preparing for a final assault suddenly found themselves fighting for survival as orbital strikes rained down around them. Ground forces deployed from the cruisers, coalition marines in full combat gear overwhelming the scattered Draconid units. Within 2 hours, the attack was broken. Draconid survivors fled into the desert, and the siege was over. The coalition commander who landed in the settlement was a stern woman named Flora, a captain with cold eyes and a reputation for getting things done. She surveyed the devastation with an expression that gave nothing away. "You held them for 5 days against overwhelming odds," she said to Giles. "That's remarkable, though the casualty rate is—" She paused, consulting her datapad. "Significant. 40% of your fighting force dead or critically wounded. The settlement infrastructure is 30% destroyed. This position is no longer defensible long-term." "We're not abandoning our home," Irison said firmly, stepping forward despite her wounds. Flora's eyes flickered to her, then back to Giles. "I'm not suggesting abandonment. I'm suggesting reinforcement. This settlement has proven its strategic value. We're assigning a permanent garrison, defensive emplacements, and regular supply runs. You've earned the Coalition's protection." She turned specifically to Giles. "And you, Captain. The Coalition wants you back, not just as an advisor or liaison, but in actual command. We're establishing a rapid response force for this sector, and we want you to lead it. Full rank restoration, command of your own unit, everything." It was the second time the Coalition had offered Giles his old life back, and once again, he felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. Command, respect, purpose, everything the military had stripped from him after Centauri, offered back without reservation. He looked at Irison, her blue skin smudged with ash and blood, her eyes filled with quiet strength. He looked at Karis, no longer a boy, but a warrior who'd proven himself in the crucible of battle. He looked at the settlement, battered, bleeding, but unbroken. "I appreciate the offer, Captain Flora," Giles said carefully, "but I need to discuss this with my family before making any decisions." Flora nodded, understanding in her expression. "You have until morning. After that, we begin establishing the garrison, with or without you in command. Think carefully, Captain. This is an opportunity to do real good on a scale you can't achieve here." That night, after the wounded had been treated and the dead honored, Giles sat with Irison on the remains of their porch. The house had taken damage in the fighting, but it still stood. Much like them, it was scarred but functional. "You should take it," Irison said before he could speak. Giles looked at her in surprise. "What?" "The command position. You should accept it. I saw you during the battle, Giles. You're a natural leader. Those people followed you because you knew what you were doing, because you could make the hard decisions. That's a gift, and you shouldn't waste it protecting one settlement when you could protect dozens." "I won't leave you and Karis," Giles said firmly. "You wouldn't be leaving us," Irison countered. "You'd be expanding your protection. The garrison they're placing here will keep us safe, but there are other settlements out there, other families facing what we faced. They need someone like you, someone who understands both human and Virani tactics, someone who can train local forces to defend themselves." She took his hand, her grip strong despite her exhaustion. "When I asked you to be a father to Karis, I meant it, and you've been everything I could have hoped for. But being a father doesn't mean hovering over him every moment. Karis is grown now. He proved that in this battle. He needs to find his own path, just as you need to walk yours." "What if I fail again?" Giles asked quietly, voicing the fear that had haunted him since Centauri. "What if I make another mistake and more innocent people die?" "Then you'll carry that weight as you carry Centauri," Irison said simply, "but you'll carry it while still trying to do good, still fighting to protect people. That's the difference between a coward and a warrior, Giles. A coward lets their failures define them. A warrior learns from their failures and keeps fighting anyway." Karis appeared in the doorway, having apparently been listening. "I agree with Mother. You should take the command. I'll stay here, help rebuild, maybe join the garrison once it's established. But you've taught me everything I need to know. It's time for both of us to move forward. Giles looked at the two people who'd become his entire world. They were releasing him, not out of lack of love, but because they loved him enough to let him be what he needed to be. And in that moment, he realized they were right. "I'll accept," he said, "on one condition. The coalition establishes a training program here, teaching local forces to defend themselves. Karras runs it. He knows these people, knows the terrain, knows the tactics. If I'm going to be out there protecting other settlements, I need to know this one is in capable hands." Both Ireson and Karras smiled. "Deal," they said in unison. The next morning, Giles accepted Captain Flora's offer. The coalition moved quickly, establishing a fortified garrison within days. True to his word, Giles secured Karras a position as chief training officer for local defense forces. The young man took to the role naturally, his mixed heritage and combat experience giving him credibility with both human and Verani settlers. 3 weeks later, Giles shipped out with his new command, a rapid response force consisting of 2 combat ships, 100 veteran troops, and orders to patrol the sector and respond to threats against frontier settlements. It was exactly the kind of mission he'd trained for his entire military career. But this time, he approached it differently. He thought about Irison's words, about Karras's courage, about the price of leadership. Every decision he made, he weighed carefully. Every risk he took, he considered from all angles. He was still the same tactically brilliant officer he'd always been, but now he was tempered by wisdom bought at terrible cost. His first deployment was to a settlement under attack by raiders. His second was to negotiate a peace between 2 warring colonies. His third was to evacuate a research station before a planetary disaster. Each mission reinforced what he'd learned, that being a protector wasn't just about fighting, it was about making the hard choices that kept people alive. Between deployments, he returned to the settlement where it all began. Each visit, he saw the progress. The garrison was functioning smoothly. Karras's training program had expanded to include delegates from a dozen other settlements. The local defense force was now considered one of the best prepared in the sector. And each visit, he and Urisan rediscovered each other. Their bond, forged in battle and tested by separation, proved stronger than distance. They made the most of their time together, knowing that duty would pull him away again, but confident in what they'd built. On one such visit, nearly a year after taking command, Giles found Karras sparring with a young Verani woman named Gabriella. She moved with exceptional grace, and it was clear from the way Karras looked at her that this was more than just training. "New recruit?" Giles asked Irisan, who stood beside him watching. "New development," Irisan corrected with a knowing smile. "She arrived 3 months ago from the northern settlements. Karras has been teaching her human combat techniques, among other things." Giles watched his son, no longer a grieving boy but a confident young man, laugh at something Gabriella said. The sight filled him with a contentment he'd never expected to feel. That evening over dinner, Karras made a formal announcement. "Gabriella and I are bonding. We wanted you both to know first. The ceremony will be in 2 months if you can be here, Father." Giles felt tears prick his eyes. "I'll be here. Nothing could keep me away." The ceremony was beautiful, blending human and Verani traditions in ways that honored both cultures. Giles stood with Irisan as they witnessed their son take his own partner, beginning his own family. It was the closing of one circle and the opening of another. After the ceremony, as the celebration wound down, Giles found a quiet moment with Karras. "Your biological father would be proud of you," he said. "The man you've become, the leader you're growing into. He would see his legacy living on in you." "Both my fathers would be proud," Karras corrected gently. "Captain Elior gave me life and showed me what honor looks like. But you taught me how to survive, how to fight, how to protect the people I love. I'm who I am because of both of you." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, you're about to be a grandfather. Gabriella is already carrying our child, so your legacy continues too." Giles felt the world shift slightly. A grandchild, another generation to protect, to teach, to love. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Life continued its relentless forward motion. Giles's command grew in size and reputation. The Rapid Response Force became the coalition's primary asset in the sector, responding to emergencies with speed and efficiency. Under his leadership, dozens of settlements survived threats that would have destroyed them, but he never lost sight of what mattered. Every few months, he returned home to the settlement, to Irisan, to watch Karis and Gabriella raise their daughter. The little girl, named Alara in honor of her grandfather Elior, had her mother's grace and her father's determination. And to everyone's amusement, she had pale skin that showed her mixed heritage. Vairani, human, and something entirely new. On Alira's 5th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration. 3 generations sat together under the light of the 3 moons, sharing food and stories. Karis told tales of his training days with Giles. Gabriella shared legends from her northern homeland. Irisan spoke of her husband Elior, ensuring his memory remained alive. And Giles watched it all with quiet satisfaction. This was his true victory. Not the battles won or the settlements saved, but this: family, legacy, love that transcended species and survived despite everything the universe could throw at it. Later, when Alira had fallen asleep and the others had drifted to their quarters, Giles and Irisan stood alone under the stars. The settlement had grown considerably, now a thriving hub of trade and culture. The scars of battle had healed, replaced by new construction and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Irisan asked, echoing the question she'd posed years ago. "All the choices you made, the path that led you here?" Giles thought about Centauri, about the desert that had nearly killed him, about the alien widow who demanded he become something more than he thought himself capable of. He thought about every battle fought, every person saved, every hard decision made. "Not for a second," he said. "Every mistake, every failure, every moment of pain, it all led me here. To you, to Karis, to this family we've built. I'd walk that path again in a heartbeat if I knew this is where it ended." Irisan leaned into him, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the desert wind play across the dunes. Somewhere out there, Giles knew, were threats yet to face, battles yet to fight, challenges yet to overcome. But for this moment, there was peace. A commotion from the garrison gates interrupted the quiet. Giles's combat instincts kicked in immediately, his body tensing. But the guard's shout was excited, not alarmed. "Captain, Coalition courier just arrived. Priority message." Giles jogged to the gate, Irisan close behind. The courier, a young officer named Isaac, handed over a sealed data chip with the Coalition's highest security markings. "From Fleet Command, sir. Eyes only. They said it was urgent." Giles took the chip to his office and loaded it into the secure reader. As the message played, his expression grew grave. Fleet Admiral Morrison's face filled the screen, the old man's features tight with concern. "Captain Giles, we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected a massive Draconid fleet gathering at the edge of the sector. Not raiders. This is their main battle fleet, hundreds of ships, moving in coordinated formations. Intelligence suggests they're planning a full-scale invasion of the frontier territories. We're recalling all rapid response forces and preparing for the largest military operation in Coalition history. Your presence is required at Fleet Command immediately. This is not a request. The fate of every settlement in the sector may depend on what we decide in the next 72 hours. The message ended, leaving Giles staring at the blank screen. An invasion. Everything they'd fought for, everyone they'd protected, was about to be threatened on a scale that made the settlement battle look like a skirmish. Irisan had followed him in and watched the message over his shoulder. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "Tonight," Giles said. "I need to gather my command staff, coordinate with the garrison here, make sure Karis knows what might be coming." "And after?" Irisan asked. "After this battle?" Giles turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "After this battle, if we survive, I'm requesting transfer to permanent garrison duty here. I've spent enough time away from my family. Let younger officers handle the rapid response missions. I want to come home, Irisan. For good this time." She pulled him close, and for a moment, they simply held each other. Then, like the warriors they both were, they pulled apart and began preparing for war. The gathering at Fleet Command was the largest assembly of military force Giles had ever witnessed. Ships from every corner of Coalition space converged on the staging area, their crews grim-faced and determined. The briefing room held over 100 senior officers, each representing different units and specialties. Admiral Morrison laid out the situation in stark terms. The Draconid invasion force was 3 times larger than coalition intelligence had estimated their total military capability. Either they'd been hiding their true strength for years, or they'd formed an alliance with other hostile powers. Either way, the frontier territories were facing potential annihilation. "We can't match them ship for ship," Morrison said bluntly, "but we can make them bleed for every meter of space they take. The plan is to establish a defensive line at the Koros Nebula, using the natural phenomena there to neutralize their numerical advantage. We hold them at Koros long enough for the core worlds to mobilize their reserve fleets. If we break, the entire frontier falls." Giles found himself assigned to a critical role, commanding the ground forces that would defend the nebula's only habitable planet, Koros Prime. If the planet fell, the defensive line collapsed. If the line collapsed, there would be nothing between the Draconids and hundreds of settlements like his home. The coalition had 2 weeks to prepare before the enemy fleet arrived. Giles used every second, drilling his troops, coordinating with fleet command, preparing contingencies for every scenario he could imagine. He worked 20-hour days, fueled by stimulants and determination. But late at night, when exhaustion finally forced him to rest, he would think of Irison and Karis and little Elira, and he would wonder if he'd ever see them again. War was never certain, and this war promised to be brutal beyond measure. The Draconids arrived exactly when intelligence predicted, their fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a display of power meant to intimidate. And it worked. Even hardened veterans felt their courage waver at the sight of so many enemy ships darkening the stars. The battle that followed would be spoken of for generations. The coalition fleet fought with desperate valor, their ships burning in the void but never breaking formation. The Draconids pushed hard, expecting an easy victory, and instead found themselves caught in the nebula's energy storms, their sophisticated targeting systems useless against an enemy that knew the terrain. On Koros Prime, Giles commanded the ground defense as enemy dropships broke through the orbital battle. The fighting was savage, close-quarters combat in the planet's crystalline forests and methane swamps. His troops, outnumbered but never outfought, held positions that should have been impossible to defend. Days blurred into weeks as the battle raged on. Casualties mounted on both sides. Ships died by the dozens, their crews lost to the uncaring void. Ground forces clashed in brutal engagements that left no one unchanged. Giles took a spear through the shoulder during a particularly vicious counterattack. He kept fighting, snapping the shaft off and using the broken weapon to kill the Draconid who'd wounded him. He was everywhere the fighting was hardest, leading from the front, refusing to ask his troops to face anything he wouldn't face himself. It was during the 3rd week, when both sides were exhausted and running low on supplies, that the tide finally turned. The core world reserves arrived, fresh fleets that hadn't been ground down by weeks of combat. The Draconids, who had committed everything to this offensive, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that outnumbered them. The retreat was chaotic and costly. The Draconids fought a rearguard action that inflicted terrible casualties, but their invasion was broken. The frontier had held, though at a price measured in thousands of lives and dozens of destroyed ships. When the firing finally stopped and the last enemy ship fled into faster-than-light travel, Giles stood among the ruins of what had been a beautiful forest planet, now scarred by war. He'd survived, though his body bore a dozen new wounds to add to his collection. More importantly, his troops had survived, most of them anyway. The victory celebration at Fleet Command felt hollow. Yes, they'd won. Yes, they'd saved the frontier. But the cost had been staggering. And Giles knew, as every soldier knew, that victory just meant you got to fight again another day. Admiral Morrison found him at the observation deck, staring out at the repair crews working on damaged ships. "You fought well, Captain. Your defense of Koros Prime was textbook perfect. Fleet Command wants to promote you to flag rank, give you a sector command. You've earned it." "I appreciate the recognition, Admiral," Giles said tiredly, "but I'm done. I've fought my war. I just want to go home." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. Truth is, you've earned the right to choose your own posting. If you want garrison duty, it's yours. And if you want to retire completely, that's yours too." Just say the word. Garrison command at Settlement Theta 7, Giles said. That's what I want. Let me protect one place really well, instead of trying to protect everywhere and succeeding nowhere. Done, Morrison said, extending his hand. And Giles? Thank you. For Koros, for the frontier, for everything. The coalition owes you more than we can ever repay. The journey home took a week, each day bringing Giles closer to the family he'd feared he might never see again. When his ship finally touched down at the settlement, now officially designated Theta 7 in Coalition records, he saw them waiting at the landing pad. Irison stood tall and proud, her white hair catching the three-moon light. Beside her, Karis held little Elira, now nearly 6 and bouncing with excitement. Gabriella stood with them, one hand resting on her belly, another child on the way. Giles descended the ramp, his wounds still healing, his body exhausted, his heart full. He embraced them all, feeling the weight of war finally lift from his shoulders. This was what he'd been fighting for. Not glory, not honor, not redemption. This, family, home, love. That night, after Elira had been put to bed and the celebration had wound down, Giles sat with Irison in their rebuilt home. The settlement had grown even more during his absence, becoming a true city now, with permanent structures and a thriving economy. I'm home, he said simply. For good this time. No more deployments, no more wars. Just garrison duty and teaching the next generation of defenders. Irsen smiled, a rare expression of pure joy. Good, because I'm tired of saying goodbye, and your granddaughter needs her grandfather around to teach her all the things her parents will tell her she's too young to learn. Giles laughed, the sound rusty from months of command stress. She's going to be trouble, isn't she? Absolutely, Irison confirmed, just like her grandfather. The years that followed were the most peaceful Giles had ever known. He commanded the garrison, trained local forces, and watched his family grow. Elira grew into a fierce young girl who showed promise as both a warrior and a diplomat. Karis and Gabriella's second child, a son named Galen in honor of Giles, was born healthy and strong. The settlement itself became a model for frontier development, a place where different species lived and worked together in genuine harmony. Humans, Vayrani, and even a few Draconid refugees who'd fled their own government's tyranny all found homes in Theta 7. Giles never forgot Centauri. The weight of those deaths never left him. But he learned to carry that weight alongside the lives he'd saved, the family he'd built, the good he'd managed to do. The balance didn't erase his failures, but it gave them context, made them part of a larger story rather than the only story. On the 20th anniversary of the day he'd first stumbled out of the desert and met Irison, the settlement held a celebration. By this point, Giles was in his 50s, gray creeping into his hair, his body marked by decades of combat. But he stood straight and strong, Irison at his side, still as beautiful and deadly as the day they'd met. Karis, now fully grown and commanding the settlement's defense forces, gave a speech honoring his father. Elira and Gillen sat in the front row, listening with rapt attention. The entire settlement turned out. Thousands of people whose lives had been touched by the man who'd asked an alien widow for work and received so much more. When it was his turn to speak, Giles kept it simple. I came to this world with nothing. No future, no hope, no purpose. I was offered a job, but instead, I was given a family. I was given a reason to be better than I was. And in trying to be worthy of that gift, I found something I'd lost. My humanity, my honor, my home. Thank you all for being part of this journey. Thank you for accepting a stranger and making him one of your own. The celebration lasted late into the night, but eventually Giles and Irison slipped away to their favorite spot, the porch of their home, overlooking the settlement they'd helped build. The desert stretched beyond, no longer a threat but a reminder of how far they'd come. 20 years, Irison mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Best 20 years of my life, Giles said, and I'm looking forward to the next 20, and the 20 after that. She leaned against him, and they watched the settlement's lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere in that sprawl of humanity and hope, their grandchildren slept peacefully, protected by walls their grandfather had helped build and trained defenders who knew their duty. And in that moment, Giles finally, truly forgave himself for Centauri. Not because the deaths didn't matter. They would always matter. But because he'd proven that one mistake, however terrible, didn't define a life. What defined a life was what you did after the mistake, how you carried the weight, whether you let it crush you or forge you into something stronger. He'd come asking for work. He'd been given family, purpose, and redemption. And in the end, that made all the difference.